In business today, three things to know. First, it's showtime at the United Nations. President Obama urges the UN Security Council to take tougher measures in fighting terrorists. Then, housing high. Sales of new homes soar. Why are they far outperforming sales of existing homes? And who are the buyers? And defense stocks on fire for the nation's defense companies and their investors. New wars mean new profits. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. A busy day at the UN. In a rare event, the President of the United States chaired the UN Security Council. President Obama urging the group to pass a global travel ban on suspected terrorists. The Security Council meeting is part of the UN General Assembly debate, which opened today. And our senior United Nations correspondent, Frank Ucciardo, is at the UN with more. Frank, what exactly is the resolution and what kind of message is President Obama and the Security Council trying to send?
Good afternoon, Andrew. Well, this resolution dovetails very nicely with President Obama's action to go after terrorists in Syria and launch airstrikes. Basically, what this resolution does do is, first of all, it asks nations to prevent travel and the transit of those foreign fighters who would leave their borders and go into another country to fight. Say, if you're going to Syria to fight, or you're going into Iraq to fight, and you are a foreign fighter from another nation. Also, number two is it also asks nations to prevent the recruitment of foreign fighters within their borders. So he's basically asking governments to crack down on those individuals who are sympathetic to foreign fighters and foreign causes, and people like ISIS, those kind of terrorist groups, and those kind of people who wish to be recruited by them, and if they know about them, he wants them to go after them and stop them from even leaving their country. But number three, there's a very interesting part of this resolution, and that is he's asking nations to go after the people who collect funds for terrorists. Basically, say if you're in the country of Nigeria and you're collecting funds for foreign fighters who want to go into Iraq and fight for ISIS, he wants the nation like Nigeria to go after that individual in their country who's collecting funds for terrorists, arrest them, put them in jail, and prosecute them.
Yeah, that's a very important point there, Very interesting point, Frank, because we've been hearing about all of this money that ISIS has, and obviously fighting terrorism involves money and cutting off the money that terrorists have. The big question, though, is for countries that don't comply, what are the consequences?
Well, yeah, that could be the sticking point here, because basically they're going to have to go back to the Security Council to get a resolution to sanction any country that doesn't go along with the resolution that was passed today. So, okay, if they identify a particular nation that says, well, okay, we don't mind terrorist fighters leaving our borders and going to fight in Iraq, well, they're going to have to come back to the council, get a unanimous vote, or get at least 9 votes to say, okay, we're going to sanction country X because they didn't go along with today's resolution. So that's a whole nother step that they're going to have to come back here for to go against anybody who doesn't comply with today's resolution, Andrew.
There's a lot more to come at the UN. What are some of the upcoming speeches we're going to see?
Okay, well, basically, we already heard from Goodluck Jonathan today from Nigeria. He talked about Boko Haram and, of course, terrorism. Those are two subjects that he is likely to talk about again later on when he makes his General Assembly speech later on this evening. And he's going to be followed by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron. He's expected to talk about Ebola, the outbreak of Ebola, also the Russian intervention in the Ukraine. And then right after him, we're going to hear from the Ukrainian President, Petro Poroshenko, who's going to talk about, of course, Russia and will the ceasefire hold. Andrew?
And Frank, I believe the Security Council probably did not talk about the pressing issue of parking tickets. The Wall Street Journal issuing a pretty stunning report today. 180 countries owe $16 million. Egypt owes $1.9 million in back parking tickets. And even in New York City, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it truly is. I mean, there are a lot of there are a handful of nations that really top the deadbeat list there, and the top 5, including Nigeria and including Brazil and including Pakistan, all owe more than $500,000 apiece. So those cars are not exactly getting towed away today, but the city wants that money paid up, Andrew.
Yeah, I know Mike Bloomberg, former mayor, tried to go after them, but kind of difficult with the diplomatic immunity. And of course, we don't want to cause any sort of State Department issues. Frank, thank you so much. Talk to you tomorrow. Turning now to domestic economic news, sales of new homes hit a six-year high last month as Americans apparently chose new over old for their home buying. The Commerce Department says sales of new homes rose 18% to a seasonally adjusted rate of 540,000. That's 100,000 more than many economists had estimated. New home sales account for about 9% of total home sales, but the numbers may ease fears of a housing slowdown following the unexpected decline of existing home sales in August. We're going to talk more about the differing numbers and who is buying in a moment. But first, Wall Street did rebound today after several steep days of declines, or several days of steep declines, depending on how you say it. The Dow was up triple digits to 154 to 17,210. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq also finishing the day on strong notes. Some of the top stocks we're watching today. General Motors announced sales in China will top 3.1 million vehicles this year. Those strong sales are in spite of an ongoing anti-monopoly probe. Here in the U.S., GM also plans to spin off its luxury Cadillac brand and move its headquarters to Soho in New York City. GM up 43 cents. The move is aimed at bringing in a younger demographic for GM. Starbucks says it will pay over $900 million to buy the rest of its Japanese unit after purchasing the remaining 40%. Starbucks expects to draw in its second largest revenue from those stores. Starbucks closing up $1.38. And Walmart partnering with Green Dot to offer low-cost checking accounts. Anyone over 18 with an ID can open up a Go Bank checking account, which offers low overdraft fees and mobile banking. The nation's largest retailer says Go Bank will be available in October. Walmart up $1.48. And taking a look at commodities, gold down and oil up $1.47. Jeffrey Tanenbaum is with Halstead Property and back here on Arise Exchange to talk about some of these housing numbers. When you go out there in the market, is this what you're seeing, that people are buying new homes but staying away from existing homes at all? Because the numbers are certainly very divergent.
Well, I think that people love new homes. They love the idea of being able to come to a family home in a new development outside of Houston, or whether it be a condominium new development in Manhattan. The buyer can customize, choose the granite, upgrade the carpet, the flooring, etc. No one's ever lived there, and a lot of developers give new buyers of new homes more attractive financing, less down payment.
That's interesting.
They have a relationship with a bank that they've secured. So beside the newness of it, it's a great investment. There's a lot of amenities, and many people just go crazy for new development.
And when we look at the existing homes data, there was some evidence that investors, which had been buying up distressed properties, sort of pulled back. Are you seeing that, and do you think that's a factor at all?
I work with a lot of investors. I'm not sure why there might be a pullback. We could speculate, maybe the ISIS crisis or this crisis or that. But I really feel investors, particularly in the more urban areas, especially in New York, are a tremendous player in our market. And I think that they will be through the remaining 4 months or 3 months of the year.
Does that concern you, though, then, as far as the stability of the housing market, if we're seeing, and we've seen this for a while, being driven by investors, people who are probably buying distressed properties or market-low properties and sitting on them, and not the traditional home buyer, meaning long-term that's not sustainable and the market might slump?
I think it's very important to maximize the full economy and how it impacts the millennials who are between 18 and 33, or those who are trying to downsize. I'd like to see more single-family homes be sold, new homes. I will say that in particular niches, investors play a bigger role than in other niches, but I'm not worried.
Do you get a sense that the home buyers are, remain very sensitive to mortgage rates, and maybe that's why they're sitting tight, afraid that mortgage rates are going to go up?
I think that's one of the reasons. I think that job security, especially for younger people, younger buyers, is a question, but we are finding that with the job market kind of stabilizing over the past few months, they're not as worried about that. I think that the interest rates are concerned, but they're still low. And even if there's an uptick in the interest rate, I believe confidently it will not be as dramatic as one might think, to hold buyers back.
Okay, and finally, what are sort of the hot spots in the country and what are the weak spots in housing? And does this track what usually happens historically?
In my readings and interpretation of the market, I think that the percentages are pretty similar to what they always are. I was a little surprised to see that of the new home sales, there was an increase of 50% in the West. I just got back from Los Angeles.
Why did that surprise you?
I see places where there's lots of property, land, not to really push the market higher, because why do I have to buy your home when I can build over here? Or
Sure.
blah, blah, blah. So that influences where people will buy. I always feel the Northeast is centric for the most expensive housing market. It was only up 29%. The South was up 8%, though I know from having lived in Houston, it's a very vibrant, bullish real estate market right now.
And maybe if you're willing to move, that's some places to look. Jeffrey Tanenbaum, thank you so much. Come back soon.
Thank you.
Coming up, when war is good for your portfolio. You're watching Arise Exchange. Informative. The U.S. economy is on the right path, and the wizard of the Fed is leading the way.
We started our companies originally to create something that made a positive difference.
Compelling.
I became very successful, not allowing myself to be average.
Our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reason. Yeah, he's sort of lost all business. Investors came back from the long weekend tanned, rested, and ready to buy stocks. Entertaining money daily. Arise Exchange. Welcome back to Arise Exchange. Defense contractors have made steady gains ever since the ISIS conflict began making headlines this summer. These stocks have outperformed the market by a wide margin, and some of them have touched all-time highs. So, what will the latest U.S. engagement in Iraq and Syria mean for defense spending and these companies? Eric Ham, Arise News contributor, joins us now from Washington. Eric, can you talk a little bit about how, there's a direct connection, really, to our military action and ramping up our defenses?
Sure. And let me just say, when I worked in the U.S. Senate, my primary role was handling defense appropriations. So every day, what I would do is I would meet with defense contractors whose sole platform was make the defense, make the Pentagon buy this from us. Mm-hmm. And so you see a lot of these dollars in terms of what's being authorized and appropriated by Congress to support these budgets that eventually you have defense companies, feeding at this trough. And you got to keep in mind, we're talking a $500 billion budget. So and this is even in downtime, which is actually after sequestration what the defense budget was supposed to be. Now we're talking about ramping up. You got 50 coalition members. So that's a lot of spending that's going to be taking place over the next several years.
And we should point out that sometimes Congress forces the military to buy equipment that they don't want.
Absolutely. And this is why not only is, when you talk about war being good for your stock portfolio, it's also good for the economy, because sure. If you look at particularly our military bases and our military industrial complex, every state has some type of military installation. So a lot of times Congress will actually make the Pentagon produce these items because they are good for business in the local economy.
Yeah, and we just had a good graphic on where some of the stocks, for example, like General Dynamics, Raytheon, up, between 28 and 44% this year. So pretty significant. You mentioned something really interesting about the local economy as well, because obviously that is what Congress people look at and why sure. A lot of this money kind of funnels through this. And I'm wondering, is the defense sector also especially paying attention to things like drones, for example, and the companies making drones? Because we don't need new, aircraft carriers, I don't think.
You're absolutely right. And also, when you talk about drones, there's also a huge spinoff. Like, a lot of people don't recognize that, companies like Microsoft, General Motors, these are not your traditional defense companies. However, they are in the R&D sector, and they are building components, particularly that a lot of this drone technology will need going forward. And so that's a huge issue. I mean, so it's not just defense companies, but it's also companies that are like third-party players in this as well.
I remember when President Obama was elected, there was a significant sell-off of defense stocks because the president had spoken about ending our wars. And yet now they're having some of the best years they've ever had. And so the question is how sensitive do you think they are to sort of what our military cycle might be? Meaning, if there's a cutback, do you see a quick cutback in these companies?
Well, that's a very good question, and we thought that maybe this would happen during sequestration, that government spending would slow down, and as a result, you'd see a number of the Beltway bandits actually having to cut belt tightening and things like that. But look at a company like Northrop Grumman, headquartered in California, and actually relocating its headquarters from California to Virginia to be closer to the Pentagon. So I think that's a sign of like future spending and also the dependence that many of these companies have on the Pentagon and on military spending. And when you look at what's taking place with our combating ISIS, this could be a 3-year operation. This could be a 10-year operation. But I think many defense companies are betting that it'll be a much longer operation going forward.
And we got to wrap, Eric, but it's really now important to look at the Export-Import Bank because that debate is going to go away pretty quickly if we have to ramp up defense. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Time now for our business ticker stories making headlines across the nation and the world. Russia on the rocks. The World Bank has cut its growth estimate for Russia over the next 2 years, now estimated at just 0.3% for the country for 2015. The World Bank says the Russian economy is reeling from international sanctions for its role in the Ukraine crisis. However, even without those sanctions, Russia's economy would only grow at an estimated 1%. Another hit for well-known fund manager Bill Gross. The SEC has launched a probe into whether PIMCO artificially boosted returns for a fund run by Gross. Gross has faced recent criticism for poor performance at the fund that he founded. The queen of comfort food is back cooking it up. The Paula Deen Network has launched more than a year after Paula Deen was axed from the Food Network for using racial slurs. Subscribers to Paula Deen's digital site can watch new original cooking program as well as older classics like how to deep fry cheesecake and lasagna. Johnny likes that. One boss is betting he'll boost morale in the office by offering more time away. Richard Branson, the billionaire founder of Virgin Group, is implementing unlimited holiday vacation time for his staff. That's right, 160 employees in New York, London, Geneva, and Sydney can take as much vacation time as they want and still get a paycheck. Virgin subsidiaries will also take on the practice if the experiment is successful. Branson said the move was inspired by Netflix, which also gives employees unlimited holiday time. And that is a movement, by the way, that is picking up the sort of modern view of time off. Well, as we reported yesterday, retailers are ramping up for the holidays by hiring lots of seasonal workers. Some major companies that have said they'll expand for the holidays include UPS, Target, Kohl's, Toys R Us, Walmart, and FedEx. In fact, a new report is projecting more than 800,000 seasonal workers for the upcoming holiday season. That's the most the industries have hired since 1999. Joining us now to talk more about this report is from the outplacement firm Challenger, Gray & Christmas, the CEO, John Challenger. John, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Glad to be here.
So first, sort of the macro view, when you see these kind of numbers coming in, what does it tell you, A, about the current state of the economy and what the estimated state of the economy will be in the next few months?
We've seen some very positive announcements on these hiring gains from UPS and FedEx. That's some interesting kind of underlying strength. FedEx last year announced 20,000. This year it's 50,000. UPS last year announced 55,000. Now it's up to 95,000. This is an indication not just of traffic on the roads shipping these goods and gifts that people are buying, but it's also an indication of traffic that's going to be in the stores.
Yeah, and pipeline, because obviously UPS and FedEx doesn't make things, but they deliver things, and somebody has to make them. So they're sort of betting from whoever they're speaking to in their pipeline that they're going to go up. You know, what do these seasonal jobs generally pay? Are these good-paying jobs?
No, they're not necessarily great-paying jobs. Probably most of them are in the $10 to $15 an hour range, but they are taken by many as second jobs to supplement their income and help them during the gift-giving season, just manage that. For some people, it does mean it gives them access to a career in retail, and they may head that direction. But for most, it's a way of just adding to the your yearly income. And today, most of us, or many of us, certainly at varying times in our lives, go through periods where we put together several jobs or several assignments that produce the income that we expect that year.
I wonder, though, is there a hangover when this is all over that we get this big pop in employment? 800,000 is a pretty big number. And then what's the effect come the new year? How many of those people historically get to keep these jobs?
Few, actually. When you look at the numbers in February and March, most of these jobs have disappeared, so there's not a long-term hit. But if you think about it, again, these are 800,000 jobs. Let's say they go on from October through January, so maybe that's a third of the year. So 800,000 times a third gives you a net of 300,000, say, jobs that come into the economy, and people do earn. It's the way our economy and the labor markets work today. People don't work full-time permanent jobs all the time. Many of the jobs people work at are these part-time jobs. So it's good for the economy no matter how you cut it, but it isn't a long-term. Again, it's a permanent, though, seasonal job creation hit that boosts the economy.
Okay, John Challenger, CEO, Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. Thank you as always.
Thanks.
Coming up, the answer is Ken Jennings. The question, why is the former Jeopardy champ our favorite person of the day? You're watching Arise Exchange.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years of the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use. Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, not for the right reasons. Our favorite person? The answer is he is a former Jeopardy champ who made an ass out of himself for insensitive Twitter comments. And the question? Who is Ken Jennings? Jennings, who won $2.5 million on the game show and is also known for his off-color tweets, may have gone too far by sending out the following tweet, quote, "Nothing sadder than seeing a hot person in a wheelchair." Now, that didn't go over so well, though Jennings neither deleted the tweet nor apologized for it. And so Ken Jennings, who may know a lot of useless trivia but doesn't know much about common decency or, for that matter, good comedy, is our favorite person of the day. Coming up, a look at hot spots to invest in Africa. You're watching Arise Exchange. Last week on Arise Exchange, will Janet Yellen spring any surprises on the markets when it comes to interest rates?
The market is worried that if they raised rates too soon, you might kill the recovery.
President Obama pledged to send 3,000 troops to West Africa to fight Ebola. Kanye West demanded all the fans attending a concert in Sydney stand.
I can't do the rest of the show until everybody stand up.
One was in a wheelchair. The other had a prosthetic leg. Watch this week for more. Arise Exchange. As anybody who has watched this show and this network will know, Africa has become the hot spot for U.S. investors recently. This is due to the global commodities boom and innovations in developing natural resources. Certain sectors such as oil and gas, financial services, agriculture, and hospitality are offering the most opportunities for investors, says our next guest, David Rice. He is the director of Afra Capitalism Institute, a Pan-African think tank based in Nigeria. He joins us here in New York. You were at the Clinton Initiative. You've been to the UN talking about what's going on there. What are you hearing coming out of there about the investment activity in Africa, which continues, from what I understand, pretty strong?
It's very strong. You know, Africa is home right now to 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world. And that's often overlooked because the media often tends to focus on some of the crises that tend to get a lot of attention. But the story underneath that is really one where there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and the flow of capital to the continent from remittances and from private investors far outweighs the flow from charitable interests.
Yeah, and if you look at the global forecast, you know, we have Europe hitting a recession, the U.S. economy is coming back slowly, but Africa continues to really be particularly strong. Where in Africa are you looking the most at investments?
Well, Nigeria is the obvious choice.
Which is now the biggest economy.
Biggest economy. They have tremendous.
They had to recalculate their GDP to get there, but they are the biggest economy.
They did. You know, with the largest population, a young working age population, a lot of untapped opportunity, both in natural resources and agriculture and financial services. It's a natural choice. South Africa is obviously still a perennial favorite. But on the emergent side, you have Tanzania, which has huge natural gas deposits, almost as much as Russia. You have Ghana, which also has a robust energy sector. And then the outlier, and some people may be surprised at this, I think, is the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Interesting.
It's because of the inherent challenges that are there that it's the really savvy investor that is going to get in early and has a chance to make a real positive return.
No pain, no gain, right? The bigger risk you take. And if you track historically and looked at other countries that went through that, it could be a pretty decent bet. You never know. You know, the hit on Africa has been that it has really been a commodities-based economy for too long. And we talk about the developments. You know, are the utilities getting to where they have to be? Are the financial sectors getting there? Are they making this transition? And when you talk about Africa, I understand it's a big continent.
Right. Well, you know, we preach this philosophy of Afra capitalism, which is that in order for the continent to develop, you have to rely more on the private sector. And so, you know, in relation to what you said earlier about the conversation at the UN, there's a lot of discussion about the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the next iteration of the Millennium Development Goals. And there isn't enough private sector emphasis within that discussion. And so that's part of what we try to do, is we bring to the conversation the perspective of the private sector, not just as a place for domestic and foreign investors to generate a return, but also to build greater prosperity on the continent.
If Americans are interested in investing, and talk about retail investors, should they be looking at American companies doing business in Africa, or can they start to take more risks and actually invest directly into African companies?
I think you have to look directly at African companies. I mean, frankly, the U.S. investor community still hasn't completely woken up to the idea. I mean, the Obama administration had the U.S.-Africa Summit just back in August. And that's just the start of a conversation that has to happen.
Which, by the way, was tremendously attended. I mean, bringing people here was a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I mean, and you saw leaders like Tony Elumelu, you saw Patrice Motsepe, you saw these African entrepreneurs who are finally getting onto the radar of the global investor community because they're obviously from there and they've proven that they know how to make money there.
We could talk about Ebola and that there's a risk there, hopefully a short-term one. But what about the long-term political risk? How do you evaluate that? Well,
with each passing election cycle, there's a growing confidence in the democratic institutions that have emerged on the continent. So it's really more about the institutions and the personalities themselves. And even for Nigeria, it's going to have an election in February. Everyone's watching. And I think that you'll see a lot of really encouraging developments in that respect, that the most populous country on the continent is going to have free, fair, and credible elections. And that sends a really important message to the rest of the continent.
And you see more and more investors, in about 15 seconds left, actually going to Africa and looking at what they want to invest in?
Investors are so interested and the opportunities are so great that they're still coming despite some of these challenges that are still ongoing.
Okay, David Rice, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very interesting. We'll have you back on to talk more.
Great.
Tomorrow on the Rise Exchange, the money Qatar is spending on the World Cup It's a pretty impressive number, and they may not even get it. Take a look at the numbers on the markets. Once again, a comeback for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, up triple digits, 154. S&P 500 and NASDAQ rebounding as well. Our UN coverage continues for the rest of the week. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arise Exchange. See you tomorrow.